the meeting to order. Jen, you can hear us okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great.
Oh, you're muted, John.
John, you're muted.
Oh, we should start with the minutes of March 23rd. Sorry about that. I sent those around. Hopefully folks have had a chance to take a look at those.
I think what I got was the
30th. The 30th?
The 30th and the 6th.
Oh, hold on. Did I got to the wrong date? Yes. I think our I'm reading the I'm reading the agenda. Yes, March 30th minutes is what we should be looking at. Sorry.
Should there be something at the top of the minutes that says all votes were taken by roll call because of the video meeting?
Yes, that's a good edit.
That would be on both of them. And then in the 30th in the model stat, that particular version of the model, I think, Mike will know for sure. At that point, it was 209,000 whatever over the levy with the elementary schools at guidelines, and then free cash applied against the tax. And the town planner and the fire department requests were on overrides.
Right. Yes.
So that's why that number looks pretty good compared to what we have in front of us tonight.
Oh, okay. Now, I mean, the difference tonight is just the elementary is not a guideline.
Right.
Yeah,
and Masco's come down some, but.
And Masco's come down. So that's a mitigating factor.
Yeah.
But everything else is the same.
Right. I think that was all I had.
Karen, you do a great job reviewing this.
In the last 5 minutes.
Oh. Hey, Spencer finally woke up.
Hey, John.
Hi, John.
You're muted, John. John, you're muted.
No. Hey, I had a question, Jen. Is 601, is that 4 abstain and 4 abstain and oppose?
Yes.
601.
Yeah.
Yes. It's 4, then oppose, then abstain.
Okay, so then I have one more amendment. On the Department of Review, Budget and Approval, on the backhoe, it should be 610.
Okay.
Karen Duvall, I think you've joined us now. Okay, we can see you now. At
I'm
least.
not sure.
But you're muted.
I'm a little behind on my mail. Sorry. If I get it, I'll
the money for the backhoe on page 2, those numbers don't add up, and I believe it was I know the 105 is correct. So was the trading value there 20,000? I don't have my notes, but I think it was supposed to be 35,000 from each department.
I believe they changed the trade-in value from 20 to 25, and then I think I saw another number that said 30. But the question was 35,000 from reserve fund. No, 35,000 from Chapter 90, 35,000 from Water Department, and 35,000 maybe from reserve fund.
Chapter 90 money.
Yeah, but there was another 35. There was a
reserve fund.
Reserve fund, yeah. There was 35 from reserve fund, 35 from Chapter 90, and 35 from Water Department. Is that
the total you needed was 100,000.
That's right.
So it was 35, 35, 30.
No, well,
they decided to keep it all.
If we did 35, 35, 35, then we wound up with an extra 5,000. I agree, and I don't know how you fix that, but that's 30. You could cut one of them by 5.
No, it's the real cost is 105,000, including fit up.
I thought you were at some.
Oh, yeah,
customization.
there was a fit up charge. That's true.
Right. Fuzzy dice.
So the cost of the new replacement is $125,000 plus $5,000 worth of fit up. And take off the $25,000 for the trade, and that leaves you with $105,000.
Oh, you're good.
I found my notes.
Yeah.
So the cost is $130,000, including fit up costs.
So we should make an amendment for that.
Yeah, Jen, did you get that for those revisions?
So what is the trade-in, or should I even put that in there?
There's a sentence that says the cost of a new replacement it should be $130,000 total, with $125,000 for the vehicle and $5,000 in fit-up costs.
Okay.
And then leave the trade-in value of $25,000 because that's what it is.
Yeah.
Right. We originally had a trade-in value of 20, and he went back and beat him up for another $5,000.
Are there other comments on the minutes for the 30th?
At the vote on the backhoe, it was 6-1 or 6 to.
I thought it was unanimous.
Yeah, it's 6 to. No, it was 6-1 from the.
Yeah.
From the reserve fund.
Right.
610.
Yeah.
601.
Not 7-0. It was just 6-1. But then the authorizations for John to do the signing, that was John abstaining, 6-0-1.
Okay.
Because he was doing the signing, he didn't want to vote.
Mike, is that what you were talking about? Oh,
Mike,
you have to unmute.
You're muted, Mike.
There's a vote that should be 6-1
Yeah,
on the backhoe purchase.
Mike,
Okay.
Mike did not support the backhoe purchase.
Okay, so that's what he was talking about.
And then John did not. vote
Right.
To authorize.
On my signing.
Right.
We have it now?
And
Thanks,
then,
Jen. Sorry to give you gas.
Karen,
No worries.
Oh, there you are, Karen.
Yeah. Did we have, the only thing I noted, and this is just my recollection, we have some of the motions were seconded and then some were not. Is that?
no, they were all
Yep.
seconded.
Jen, this is Lou
Yeah.
Ross. There's on page, I'm not sure what pages, I haven't mine in red line form here, but it says the water department article was Article 3rd, that should be Article 4th. And it's basically at the top of the recounting of all the motions, all the votes that were taken.
So it should be Article 4th. Okay.
Yeah, so I noted from there were motions, so starting with the replacement of the fire station air handler. Do those need to be seconded? I don't know if they were or not. I didn't have notes on that, but
Everything was. We wouldn't have moved on without a second.
right, so there's no notation of the second. Just the motion and then the votes.
Oh, yeah, I've probably got that.
We're still looking at the 30th, right? Sorry.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So after the last one that's noted as being seconded is the North Side radio communication, which was Article 14th.
And
Oh, wait, no, sorry, the 16th was the last one noted. And then everything below that does not have a second, but I didn't know if it, and a few of them didn't note the article, I think. No, it did. So 18th, 19th, 20th, 24, 26.
Yeah, I see. I missed a sentence in them.
And then
Yeah,
there's two motions on 31st. So one is the veterans eligibility for exemptions and the other was the post-employment. I think those were two different articles, right? The last two.
Can we fix all those by just making a confirmatory motion tonight? Do we want to go back and look at our notes and see who seconded for each one of those?
My notes won't be much help.
Mine have it.
You're so good, Karen.
You're awake.
Or just go back and look at the video.
That'll be quicker. If it's okay with everybody, I could just send the seconds to Jen if she doesn't have them all.
I'm cool with that. So any further comments? So I'll entertain a motion. Subject to.
I'll make a motion to approve the meeting minutes of 3:30 with the clarification that Karen will provide to Jen who seconded the final 5, it looks like, or 6, 7 motions.
Okay, hearing the motion, is there a second?
I'll second.
Hearing a second, is there further discussion?
Ms. Ketch.
All right, since we're on the Zoom meeting, let's do the roll call vote. Lou?
Aye.
Jay?
Aye.
Eric? Eric's on mute. Eric again?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Karen Dow, sorry.
Aye.
Karen Duvall.
Aye.
And John Guido votes aye, so that passes unanimous. That was simple. Now we can move to the minutes of 4/6. Hopefully I got the date right this time. So we got Karen Dow's first comment about the roll call vote annotation, right, Jen? You're going to add that?
Yep.
Thank you.
I don't think I had anything.
I don't think I saw anything this week.
Didn't make a lot of votes, did we?
No. Any comment?
No comment.
Okay, hearing that, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion. Go ahead, John.
No, I'll make a motion to approve as amended.
Hearing a motion, is there a second?
Second.
Lou Ross seconds. Jen, did you get that?
Yes, I did.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Lou?
Aye.
Jay?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Karen Dow?
Aye.
Karen Duvall?
Aye.
And John Guido votes aye. It's unanimous. All right. So moving on. Sorry that took some time, folks. First item that we want to chat about is the update on the model. Mike.
Okay. So I'll share the screen. Can I share my screen? I'll share my screen here. If I can. I'm not sure I can share the screen.
I'd ask on the, when we go to the model, when Mike talks about elementary and Mike talks about Masco, if the liaisons could jump in with the color from the meetings and the progress that happened. We had schools on the agenda as a placeholder, but we got the info from where they're at. So I know Zillie's on the phone, and I know the elementary school superintendents have a Boxford School Committee meeting right now, so they're not unable to join. But I think we have liaisons have the updates as to what happened. So
Yeah.
kind of hit the model on this kind of all at once would be ideal.
Okay, sure. So on this Zoom meeting, I can't share my screen. So that would be the first thing. So the model that John passed around, which I think was 2.1 copies.
2.8.
What? Yeah,
2.8.
2.8 copy. So the differences in the past were the Masco budget came in at 3.1% on the operating side, which was a 4.55% to Topsfield. And then I put in the elementary budget at their requested $9,212,902. And then everything else has been the same that we've had for the last couple of weeks. I did double check this against Catherine Gabriel's model, keeping free cash to reduce the tax levy at $0. The amount over the levy is $328,665. And then in the model I point out, there's some basic notes there. I realize we haven't voted either the Masco or the elementary budget, but those are the numbers that put in based on what the elected committees want. Any questions? Any more detail that people want to add? Or
yeah, I guess I'll start with elementary if that's all right, John.
Sure.
Yeah, so elementary school committee met last week to continue the budget process to continue to push down the numbers. They made some more cuts, as you'll see noted in the model. Per Mike's notation there, a 3.36% over guideline. They've given up a lot. I think one of the things that was really telling about how much they really realize the gravity of the situation right now with what we're all going through is they reversed their prior decision on the 5-day kindergarten, which I think was a really big one because, they've been really trying to move that as an agenda for the last couple of years. They were hoping to make a step to cut the 5-day kindergarten tuition in half and kind of do it in a phased approach. But they realize they need that revenue right now, and it would be not prudent to give that revenue up at this stage of the game, given where we're at. So that was a big reversal. They also had a behavioral specialist position in there that they contract out, which is roughly about 0.6 FTE. They were trying to get that up to 1 FTE. They brought that back down to 0.6 FTE. So they basically ended up finding another $60,000 after all the cuts that they've been making, and now we're down to their $9.2 million number, which is virtually at guideline.
No, it's not a guideline.
Well, no,
it's well over guideline.
3.36 is.
So their guideline calculation is between 0.3 and 0.61%, depending how you calculate it. Going with their calculation, their guideline is 0.61%.
Yeah.
Because are you saying, Mike?
Depending on how you look at the SPED, right?
Right, but I'm going with the school committee's interpretation of the numbers.
So to be clear, though, just so we understand, they have definitely made cuts and have done a substantial amount. And I agree with the kindergarten as much as we'd like to see that. It's really
right.
But I just want to be clear. What you're saying is they're still including in that number is they're not recognizing the drop in special ed expected special ed.
They're recognizing it. But in terms of operating budget, they're up 5.81% over.
So by recognizing, I mean they're not pulling it out. They're reporting based on with that inclusive.
Yes.
I think, and again, I don't think they're
bloating
their budget or adding costs. I think it's we'll see, but I bet the majority of that increase is the point that we all made in our guideline letter at the beginning of this year, that this is what happens when you have steps and COLAs and you go across the entire school base.
Sure.
It's going at a faster rate than the 2.5%. I mean, that's right. It's not that I don't think they're playing games and just up the big numbers. I think I would call it it's a pretty close to level service budget. It's just
that's right.
The cost that it takes to maintain the level of services is growing faster than the guideline.
So if I can, with respect, I agree with you to an extent, but I will say, and I agree I don't have an issue with the budget. My angst and problem is they're not applying the same level of clarity that would likely be applied if there had been a drastic increase in special ed. So
But
if
they
special ed has gone up by 400,000, it'd be in bold letters. Part of our budget increase is 400,000 in special ed. And it's not.
Oh, they'd have pulled that. Yeah, well, the extraordinary sped would have been pulled out, like it always gets pulled out.
Yeah, I would say it is what it is.
Yeah, no,
I do agree. My angst isn't about this budget. It's about just maintaining a process that
Consistent.
if we're saying, we're going to ignore special ed, no different than for, the 1.72 here for Masco isn't actually 1.72 because that's the removing the debt.
Yeah.
In their numbers, they're clear and they do acknowledge a separate number that says this is our operating budget increase.
Yeah, so the school committee did make one mistake. They went out on social media and published the wrong guideline number. But I think we've corrected that now, and they know the agreed guideline is 0.61% increase.
And that's what's on their bandage sheet. It's
Right.
very clear. They've got, now that they know all their special education costs for next year as best they can, and it's zero. That's just what the guideline is.
It's Eric or Karen.
At this point.
Oh, sorry.
Listed everything. I was going to say they've listed everything in their banded sheet of, okay, well, if you wanted us to get down to the guideline, this is what would go away, and it's things that exist this year.
So as of 3 weeks ago, I think they've been very clear on it.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yep.
Eric or Karen, has there been any discussion at all about whether there's been any savings now that school's canceled through the end of this year? Any savings that's applied toward next year's costs?
Yeah, they did make a comment at the last committee meeting. It's a small dollar amount that they save for the month because of maintenance and whatnot. But there's no expectation that that's gonna continue. It's not like there's an automatic monthly savings every time you're out of school and you're not open. But there was some small savings as a result of it. It wasn't significantly material.
I thought when I read through their notes that there was a $60,000 that Steve Greenberg had made a $60,000 note relative to the closure of the schools.
No, the school committee cut back on $60,000 worth of items that they had in their budget.
Yeah, but they might be.
It wasn't as a direct result of the closing.
Right.
They're also missing revenue with the buildings closed because they're not renting it out for indoor lacrosse or whatever.
Are they playing?
You're breaking up a bit, Karen.
That's odd.
But yeah, you're right. They didn't touch on the revenue side of it.
Masco did not either, but are they paying? The only thing I could think of would be busing. Because they're paying, I know they're paying, that's a contracted service, so I assume that they have to, but in that one.
Well, hopefully they're saving on heat.
Probably less without those little warm bodies in the building. It's probably costing
whatever, HVAC or whatever.
No, I'm just kidding.
Mike is going to look for every penny that he can.
So they've I guess the point is they've grinded it down pretty good. I mean, they've pushed it pretty hard. And it doesn't appear that there's that many more places to pull from without cutting services.
Or changing their class size philosophy, which is really the elephant in
That's
the
the
room.
crux of the issue.
Right. That's a longer term strategic discussion, I think.
Although, didn't they did remove some of those additional classes?
They removed both the additional sections. Yep.
Oh, yeah, because
Yep. That's right.
So they wanted to go more towards more smaller classes, even
That's
smaller classes, and they moved up to that. But they could go for bigger class sizes. It gets down to, I think our town has an HR issue of the contracts, the COLAs, the steps are rising at a high rate, and it's hard to afford that. We're going to have a trade-off between level of service and the rate of those costs. I think it's
what are the class sizes they want to achieve this year? That hasn't come up in any discussions I've been part of.
They haven't targeted it specifically, but they, there's been comments out there. I think they would like to see it at, under 20 cases.
I think that's what they achieve with this budget.
Right.
There's in some grades you could see trimming a class section and going from 18 to 22. But that's philosophically not where they've been the last couple of years.
That's right.
Can I just throw in, I actually just pulled up the meeting minutes. So it was a notation from Steve Greenberg, and it says projected savings due to the closure are around $60,000 because in part of the out of district special education dollars have dropped.
That's interesting.
The closure. Yeah, I don't
Due to the closure, $60,000 projected savings that they're looking to retain and apply to next year, given that they expect shortfalls going forward.
The only way they can retain it is prepaying 1/4 of the special education tuition.
No, that would be, that'd be the equivalent of a tailing, right?
Yeah, well, they can also buy some materials that they intended to buy in August, but they'll buy them in June. And they'll turn some money back to the town because they typically do, just not a lot.
Yeah, there's a reference to the expected cuts in state funding, thus wanting to retain it.
Huh. They don't get the state funds directly except for some little grants.
Yeah. Did their Title I funding go away this year, or did that hang in there?
I don't think it went away.
Okay, but their override last year was based on.
I know. Yeah, I don't think it's gone. I have to go back and look, but I don't remember any comments that was completely gone.
So Eric and Karen, the cuts that they've noted, which was the bring back of the full revenue for kindergarten, the reduction of everything going to 5 days, sticking with 1 3-day, the bump back down to the current level of service, which was the 0.6 for the special ed instead of moving up. That's the totality. So they didn't dip into that list that was in the tier 3, right? Which was
no, they didn't. And then there was some small money in there for the director of facilities positions
travel or something.
It was like $1,200 or whatever thrown into the mix there.
So, hey, Eric and Karen, I know Kevin was looking for detail on what elementary cut, and I don't see him in his office right now. So you may have to repeat that to him a couple seconds if he's back.
Okay, sure thing.
I just wanted to, when I was chatting with him earlier, he had asked about that, and I said, you guys have the details, we'd be covering it. But other color on that before we move to Chase comments on Masco? All right, Jay, want to give us an update on Masco?
Masco came in when they did their drop. They did have a comment at the start. I'll start with that. They said that they felt our note and our ask was very, quote, reasonable. So they felt, I want to give them credit as they heard the message. I think it helped that Boxford had come in asking, not saying we need to be at this, but asking what 0 would look like. So I think that helped in that, but they did say that I want everyone to realize that they felt it was a reasonable ask considering everything. They came in initially and they had a list of similar type things, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 impacts, and it totaled out to actually 2.97% would be the total increase. And the one thing they put back, and personally I understand this and can kind of support it, was they put back in $32,000. It was at $495,000 that they were going to pull out with these things, which the one thing they put back in was a late bus, 3 late buses, 2 days a week. So 2 days a week, because the problem is they feel for an equal opportunity for the kids, any extracurricular activity or any classroom support, so going for extra help, is not available to someone who has to take the bus home. So they put that back in. That's the only thing they put back in off of the list that the administration had put together. And that list included a couple of things that we had talked about here, including keeping the property insurance at the level it's at now. If you remember that that's some uncomfort around that, but it's at about $50 million right now if the building goes in any part of it. At that point, it's maxed out. And they wanted to up that. They also are not going to give the daily subs an increase this year. And they eliminated 4 Chromebooks from the middle school carts from the middle school that they planned. The 4 Chromebooks would net out, I think, to where there was a 1-to-1 ratio at that point, or nearing, or almost at that. They are doing some reductions in forces of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 positions that are non-teaching positions, so administration and paraprofessionals. There is some of this that is a true RIF, and there is some of this, and we didn't get numbers of details, but some of this that is more as positions. There are some known vacancies that are occurring, and they're not going to fill. They are reducing 2 teacher positions. They are not reducing 2 teachers, but because of normal vacancies, they are reducing 2 teachers' positions, and they're going to move people around to fill those 2 positions across the group. And so the total on that was $463,000 reduction, and it brings them in at 3.09%.
That's their budget. That's 3.09.
Their budget is 3.09. Their line item, just so you know, even in this year with these reduction and things, their line item for raises was about a 3.5 or 3.6% increase. So it's not to the extreme we're seeing in other places, and we need to dig into those numbers more, but it still speaks to what we've all been saying, but what John is emphasizing, we've all here, that, if your largest line item is above 3% every year.
Yeah, but at least Masco begins with a 3.
Yeah. So if it's above 3% each year, then you can't keep, you can't keep to level services and stay at a 3% increase. But I think that they've done a substantial job here. They do. The net to us here says 1.7. That's because the initial bond from the rebuild of Masco from 20 years ago is tailing off. And this is a big year that it had a major drop. But other than that, that's where we're at.
I got a text from Kevin that something happened that he's taken care of, and he's going to come back on if he can. So I don't know what that means. All right. So when I look at the model, we're off this 328.67, and I know while we had voted the fire number above a guideline, that's really not contemplated in that negative 328.67, because as of right now, its model is funded in an override.
Right.
So you got that, and then we haven't applied free cash, which our guideline procedures, policy guidelines suggest you got to keep it under 1%. So that's 250, 260K. And then the other levers are the assumptions of the state receipts. And we do have a reserve sort of assumption of 150K, right? So in the past,
excess levy.
Yeah. So we've talked about, and maybe in the past, we've moved that 150 down to 100, but it's like, I don't know, if you keep the state receipts at a high level where they are now, you have to keep a high buffer, or you can get rid of the buffer, but then you'd have to bring down the assumption of the state receipts, and you kind of end up in the same spot. So personally, I don't know if there's a lever there. So my back of the envelope was you're off the 328.67. You apply, say, 250, 260, so you're 65, 70K off, and then if we go for fire or not, there could be as a high of $133,000 delta, $134,000 delta.
If
Along
we
the
go-
What's that? Assuming, right, no overrides, and but there's not a lot of extra levers to really pull.
Yeah.
One
Well,
thing I checked with Jen Collins Brown, and the fire, the 65K is to properly staff the station on the graveyard shifts. She said, I'll do it for 50,000 and run one person on some of those graveyard shifts. But I gotta have people in the station. One person's not exactly safe. It's not what
You can't go out
about working alone, but well, they have in the past. I mean, I remember Chick Denault telling me, yeah, I responded to a fire. I looked to my left and waved that person over here, and looked to my right and waved that person there, and realized there actually wasn't anybody to be directing. It was just me.
Sure, but
I mean, it's happened.
Yeah.
It gets somebody out. So, but right now, whether it's 65,000 or 50,000, it's still, unless it's on an override, it adds to the amount we're over the maximum levy.
I mean, I think the override gives a town a chance to vote on it and talk about it, because we did have a vote on this a few years ago, and
that was why we separated out it is a separate line item in the warrant.
Yeah.
But I didn't think we wanted to go that far to actually have it as an override.
It's really up to the selection end.
I mean,
I think we want to try to avoid overrides if we can, though, right, guys?
I do too, but this is a philosophical thing, right? There was a 24/7 warrant and it didn't pass 4 years ago, and we've been creeping back that way without.
Well, no, it went to a committee, and then the committee recommended having coverage, and then it never happened.
Well, all right, but that warrant article did not pass at town meeting, right?
I think that one was quite a long time ago.
Mike, you're right. It did not pass. But when a few years ago, when we were talking about 24/7 fire department, it was significantly different kind of thing than we're talking about now, when Karen wants to put a couple of guys on 24 hours in the station. Fact of the matter is, it doesn't help the budget anyway. It's just a debate of whether you're going to have an override or not.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
I think that probably that would pass as an override, and I am not in favor of overrides in general, but I think that would pass at town meeting when we tell people that we're playing with fire here because we don't have anybody that's going to show up at a fire or a problem in the middle of the night and somebody dies. And I think that's an issue. And I think that could be a point that's strongly made at town meeting, and I think that'll pass.
Oh, I agree with you. I think it should be a town meeting. I don't think it should be in the budget. That's all. So, but it's just an opinion.
Well, I think that was the opinion of the Board of Selectmen, and that's why we agreed to put it on the warrant as an item on the warrant.
Mm-hmm. I'm of the opposite view. I think it should be in the budget. I mean,
but either way, even on a separate warrant article, it can be funded by taxes, not exclusively the override.
Eric, I agree with you. It's going to wind up being part of the budget anyway. If it goes on town warrant this year and it gets voted in, what are we going to do? End it next year? Or are we going to put it on the? No, we're not going to do that. It's going to be part of the budget next year.
That's right. That's right.
And that makes Hartman's job even more complicated. Oh, I love to jab you in the ribs.
So,
guys on the Board of Spending, man, I'd love to have,
So, ultimately, we still need to find a couple $100,000, right? Or
that's right.
$100,000 at least. And there's one that, may or may not be the right place to do it. What are the other options?
Yeah, I don't think there's much more to get from Masco. I think they've done a great job, and I was hoping Kevin was on the phone. He and I chatted. I know Kevin and Catherine were chatting. We need to find a way we got to find some pockets somewhere. We have the bandit sheet at elementary schools. Those are some. They've said that they've articulated that they've made tough decisions. And going further on the bandit chart are tougher decisions for them. I don't want to put word in Eric or Karen's mouths, but that's what at least I've heard. And so, yeah, we have to find $135,000-ish ish.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if the elementary just stays at their guideline, that gives us 200,000 back.
Yeah, but then you're down the bottom of their banded sheet.
I get it. I just think it's an unusual year we've got coming in, and if Masco can hold guideline.
Well,
Masco's not cutting services, are they?
They're cutting 9 positions.
Are they really?
Well, they're cutting 9 positions. Yeah, Masco's cutting in. I mean,
Now,
They're gonna
most of
let
the
people go.
administrative positions are only.
I would say if the elementary needs 5.8% to maintain level services, someone's got to put pressure on them that you try and get down to a 3 point something, not a 5 point something. And that's a negotiation issue. But if we just keep sticking it to the taxpayer, there'll never be any pressure to keep that back, to beat that back.
One thing that helps Masco a little bit is they're just that much bigger than just Topsfield Elementary. So when they have a retirement, it's more often and they bring in a less expensive teacher. Mm-hmm. So they've got a little more churn there that helps a little bit.
But they're still running at a 3.6% or more raises annually. So it's, Karen, I absolutely agree with you, and it may be less reflective than other places, but they still have the same problem.
Oh, they've got
they have to address.
Yeah.
Yeah,
they've
maybe
got,
a little less.
I mean, the school grids are similar across the country, probably even, certainly within the state. And I mean, it's something I said it did probably 15 years ago when I was trying to negotiate a 0 for the teachers, the elementary teachers. And, the grid is what the grid is. Good luck trying to negotiate away 50, 60 years of tradition, and what people see is, they start low because they can see their path to making a decent amount of money. That's the teacher's view of it.
Karen, did the school committee actually vote on the bandit sheet? Did they vote, or did they just, that's what the consensus was? Was there a formal vote?
They voted. Each item they voted down.
But they didn't go farther down the list.
No, they didn't go into that level.
The tiers that they were talking
Right.
That's what I was just
Spitzer, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, John.
I was just going to say that having negotiated the new teacher salary guide, it is an interesting question that this is Kevin. Hang on, I'm going to ask him to wait. Kevin, you wait 2 seconds. So anyway, long story short, one of the keys is getting really good relationships with the teachers and picking away at it. And there's always a time when there's something they're willing to do. I don't think there's a faster step than a single salary grid change that's reasonably possible. But I think it's something that possibly the elementary schools could do. Masco's problem, by the way, with low starting salaries wasn't that people were happy with them. It was that we couldn't attract the best people, and every summer we'd lose several that were hired to other area schools that were paying $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 more. Most important thing we did is we dropped the top level about $12,000 to $15,000.
But you made changes to the grid, right?
We actually changed the grid, changed the angle of the grid. And if you took everybody who at that day we approved it, If you put them and put them all on the new grid, which of course was not going to happen, they're all grandfathered, but that's the best comparison. It was, I think, about $985,000 a year savings.
So, I mean, you're kind of making the point.
Yeah, it's a 15-year process to cycle through. But
Yeah, I mean, the numbers wouldn't be that big for elementary.
no, not short term, but anyway, I didn't want to interrupt too much, but I think there's potential there, but it's a tough shot.
Well, and Mike, we're in the process of trying to do the same thing with our town employees grid, and but that's not something that we can do immediately. We're going to have to grow into it over a period of a year or two at least. But I think it's our common goal to get rid of that steps and levels program that we've got with the Topsfield grid.
Yeah, boy, if this were any other year, I'd say, God, everything's looking great right now. But it's going to be a tough. I mean, I don't know what you guys are looking ahead, but at least in my business, the hospital business, it's going to be rough the next year. I don't know what the rest of the world looks like.
Well, and we haven't talked much about what's going to happen with state aid too. I'm not sure there's much appetite on the part of our Congress to cut Chapter 70, but I can see other kinds of things being cut because they're not going to have the money.
Yeah. Well, fortunately, the Chapter 70 money is like 1.2 million of the 2 million that we get in state aid. So at least, the cuts are only on 800,000.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question relative to the larger picture on property taxes, things of that nature? I know there's been some discussion of pushing due dates and things of that nature. I saw something come up, Newburyport released that they're extending dates and they're waiving late fees and interest and things of that nature. Does that, are we expecting that to be impactful to us, particularly if this starts to creep past? I mean, right now they're only pushing to June 30th, obviously, but do we expect that to go into, next fiscal year? And is that going to be problematic for us?
Well,
relative to our receipts?
We've talked about that. Catherine can give some advice on that, I'm sure. But the fact of the matter is the state allowed us to extend property taxes from May 1 to June 1 without penalties. We could go beyond June 1, but when I go to our town fathers, Catherine being one, that's a kind of a misnomer. Sorry, Catherine. When I go to her, we know that if we try to extend it beyond June 1, we have a cash flow problem in town. So we've decided, the Board of Selectmen has decided not to go beyond June 1 at this point in time.
But none of this makes any difference to the budgeting at all, Karen. It only delays when this particular quarter, the fourth quarter's revenues come in. That's the only difference it makes.
Right. What I'm saying though is, I understand this year. I'm talking about, do we have, are we watching to see, are we going to end up with people not paying taxes, to my point, because they just don't have the income to do so, and therefore a reduction in our, revenues for the year? And is that something we should be keeping in the back of our mind?
That's certainly possible, but one of the things on that.
Do we really think that that's going to be a major impact?
I mean, I know Kevin gave us some statistics from 2008, 2009, 2010. Granted that people had, for instance, the mortgage companies will kick in and pay because they don't want to see properties go into default.
Right, if you're escrow,
taxes and things of that nature. But right now, mortgage companies right off the bat are giving people 3 months of forbearance. I mean, people are going to extend beyond that. If this goes, with some level of expectation, you're going to have people pushing their mortgage off more than those 3 months. Are the banks still going to float people for those, people taking forbearance? I mean, I'm just putting it out there that, are we considering the possible ramifications of these shifts? Even if it is, Dick, to your point, a shift in when we, the receipt date. If we see ourselves pushing stuff off, 6 months, we've got a couple month push off here. If it starts to trickle into next the first quarter of next fiscal year, we start to see a push off again of a couple months. Is that going to be impactful to us? And should we be appreciating that with what we're looking at with the budget right now? Because we may end up in a cash flow issue.
I'm certainly not an expert in this field, but my suspicion is it's not going to affect us much this year or this next quarter or the next couple of quarters. But I can tell you, I think it could be a really big issue next year after we've been through this for another quarter or two. I think Karen, I think it's going to get worse.
And we talked about this last week, and it was, we could use our crystal balls and guess. We don't know what's going to happen. And I think we thought that, hey, without overrides or without cuts, how do we maintain level services? And then once we know what the no is, then cut once the bad news reality comes in and we know exactly what we're dealing with. And I think, and we all articulated that since we are negotiating contracts, they started in the old world and they're going to be concluded in a questionable unknown world. And I think all employees everywhere need to figure out, do I want to, prioritize my job or prioritize what that comp is in those slots? And so there's two ways to do it. And again, I don't think it's up to the finance committee because we're not privy to negotiating any of that stuff. But just the two ways to do it are you try to maintain status quo. And once you have a known of the bad news, tell people here's the bad news and here's what we need to do. Or you try to get people to see the future and folks work together. And again, but that's not our finance committee's job. And I think last week when we had this discussion, we said, well, as opposed to just decreeing a guess of a cut across the board, how do we, without overrides, get level service budget? And I think that's what we're trying to accomplish. We could change that and change that tone. Yes, the next couple of years are going to get lean, but we don't know. There's stuff that came out today about next winter. This is going to be worse this year than it was next year than it was last year because you're going to have the ones at the same time. So nobody knows, and so I don't know. It's tough. I don't think there's a right answer.
We had a pretty significant conversation with Kevin the other day, and he is in the middle of contract negotiations with our town unions. And he is of the opinion that without any facts, without any real direction, he can't go to those people legitimately and ask for a 0% increase on their budget. Now, he said, I think down the road, a quarter or two, when we have more facts about what our financial position really is, he said, I don't think I've got a problem going back to those people and saying, we got to renegotiate those contracts. He's willing to do that. And I personally am, at this point in time, willing to go along with that.
What would those facts be? What would those facts
be? I don't know. Those facts would be a cut in state aid, a cut in, are we going to get our businesses back in business so that they can pay their taxes? I really don't have any idea. I'm not at that pay grade. I think that was Eric, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So if I can, just one question. It's more of just, when we're saying we're going to ask for a zero, would ask for a zero. And if he had that information, what you're really talking about isn't a zero. You're talking about everyone gets their step. There's just the grid itself doesn't shift.
Right. We're
right?
talking about the rate of growth.
Are you saying no, that person who's anything other than a step 12 or 13, whatever the top is, would not get a raise?
Well,
you know what I mean? All I'm trying to say is I get confused when I hear a 0% raise, whether we mean in that 0% raise, which means my salary next year is the same as this year, or am I talking about I move on the grid, but the grid, there isn't a cost of living.
There's two different things here, Che. One of them is the non-union, and the other is the union. I think what Boyd was talking about was negotiating with unions.
Oh, exactly.
I'm very careful about discussing this.
Yeah.
We want We want to have good
Understand.
bargaining.
Understand. No, I understand. I'm sorry. I was confusing.
That was the difference.
Non-union.
Well, I need to clarify that we've got union versus non-union.
Yeah. No, that was on me. I should have, because the only ones you'd be negotiating with rather than managing to the union. So I should have figured that. Sorry.
So hearing Karen Duvall's question, I think everybody shares that exact same sentiment. The question is, for this year's budget, do we try to instill cuts, or do we stick with what we were talking about last week of how do we get a balanced budget without any override, which is as close to level service as possible?
That the latter is what I would prefer. No overrides, level service, balanced budget.
So let me ask you a question in that with this. I kind of tend to do that, except for a few things I'd like to think about. What's the police budget and their stuff look like if there's no fair? I mean, if we're in this place, I mean, the funds that do come in ways.
That's a good question.
There are some things that we can look at and just ought to think about and have. Okay, it's either going to be yes or no.
I wouldn't have assumed that there's no fair at this point, even though it may be a different environment there. But
without the fair, the police budget's up 6.25%.
Yeah, the fair pieces, I don't think we had agreed to.
We had not agreed to it, but the police budget is going up healthy.
Yeah.
But the fair has very little effect on the police budget. Most of that is special details. Now, the town does collect administrative fees for doing the processing of details. So we might get hit on that. And the question is, well, then we don't need as much hours of people's time. But the actual cost of the fair is not very little.
Yeah, it's more the revenue for the taxes and things like that, right?
The local receipts.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
The fair doesn't affect if the fair doesn't happen, it should not affect the local receipts, except perhaps in the case of meals tax.
Yeah.
And inspections.
It's true. Thank you.
Yes, there is a lot on the inspection. Yeah.
But theoretically, that's right. Thank you. That's a big one.
Inspection savings too. Yeah. So it's a little more offsetting.
And any of their payment in kinds or donations aren't in our budget. They're outside of the budget. Because I mean, the reality, and I just wanted to use the fair as an example of saying there are a few things we can look at and go, we're either going to be in a situation or we're not. And if we are in the situation, that's gone.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one that just
but each one is so independent, and we don't have a crystal ball. I mean, I agree.
But I think, Shay, if I can follow on your comments, my expectation would be, and I'm 99.9% sure Kevin would manage to this, and as would the selectmen, but my expectation or my assumption would be if we did have a case where something doesn't occur, that money is carved off and held and not utilized within their budgets. It's not this didn't happen, ergo the money's still there and I'm going to go spend it on something else. I think that's to your point, right, Shay? It's like, okay, if we pass this budget, and everything goes through and it gets approved, and then we see these mitigating circumstances happening, there's got to be an expectation that those monies that should not be expended do not get expended on something else simply because they happen to be there available for people and for departments. They've got to be very prudent right off the bat to hold as much back as possible where these things start to drop off or where they don't need to spend. Anticipating that there would be.
Yeah, that's a tough one, though. I mean, anything that falls in that other category, they have flexibility to move those monies within that category as they see fit.
Yeah, but that's why Kevin's paid the big bucks.
Right.
Well, I think it becomes part of an educational process. We somehow need to convince these folks that just because they got these monies in various pockets that weren't spent, we're all in the same boat, and that doesn't mean that you can just go spend money that you wanted to anyway because you didn't spend it on something else. We've got to make these people aware of the fact that these are tough times, and we're all in this together.
I mean, I use this line Mr. Gant can acknowledge it, but I use this line when we're talking with Masco, is that, hopefully Topsfield, Buxton, and Middleton and our towns tend to fare a little better, but they're talking about June. Basically, 1 in 5 of us wouldn't have a job.
Right.
Yep.
Look at your 2 neighbors to your right and 2 neighbors to the left. 1 of you 5 wouldn't have a job.
There is an advantage to being an old guy like me that doesn't have a job.
I tend to think
It depends, Floyd, on whether or not you are in a retirement plan or if you have your own investments.
Jay, that's a national statistic, and
no, that was a Massachusetts statistic. Over 18% of Massachusetts will be.
Okay, that's fine. They're going to call that statewide. I wouldn't necessarily automatically apply that curve to Topsfield.
That's why I said Topsfield at the start.
Well,
that's why I said Topsfield at the start. Hopefully, usually fares better than this.
Difficult to put numbers on it, in my opinion, but I would agree that in the next month or 2 or 3, it's going to get significantly worse, and we've got to figure out a way that we can try to live with our budget.
Most of those unemployment numbers are coming from, travel, hospitality, hotels, things like that. Recreational spending, luxury, that kind of stuff.
Retail.
If you look at the dispersion of employed folks in this town, and most are, broadly speaking, in the white collar, positions that are in different fields. It's not to say there wouldn't be an impact. There'll certainly be some impacted for sure, but I wouldn't automatically assume that it's that 20% number for the state is applied directly to Topsfield.
I don't think we did. I said from the start, Topsfield fares better, tends to fare better, but it's an impactful thing to think about. It also means that the state doesn't, they're talking a 14% reduction at their meeting a week ago, they were talking a 14% reduction in earnings. They have a zero balanced budget. What do they do?
The comment, I think, during Matthew's thing was something.
Well, those are the kind of numbers that we were talking about the other day with Kevin. And he said, I'm willing to talk about those things, but we don't have any facts. We don't have any numbers. We don't know how bad this is going to get. And he said, like you said, I'm going to continue on my program of negotiating union contracts at the 2% level. But he said, when you've got some facts that we can talk about, I'm willing to reopen those contracts and go back to 0. And I will tell you that Gant was very outspoken and forceful about the fact that we got to start now with 0%. Kevin said he didn't think he could do that, but he would willing to do it, and he would be willing to do it in the future.
Jay, you comment whether it's 10, 15, or 20% of people who have a problem with employment in our town. The issue goes back to what Karen had said. What effect will it have on our taxes? And so it's very possible that we'll have some increased delinquency in taxes. Hopefully, very little, but it is certainly possible. If it was 1%, we're talking about in the order of $250,000. So it is another factor that we have to be concerned about. Whether it's a few people, 10% or 20%, it's a factor that we need to be concerned about. It's just one more.
Catherine, this is Lou Ross. When do we usually find out the state aid numbers? What time of year?
We would usually have them by June, but who knows what's going to happen this year. I suspect that we're not going to get them anytime soon.
What the state typically has done is they've given us a number in March that is something that they have voted on as an agreement, that's what they will give us for UGR. And then they do their actual budget, which is sometimes something more than that. But that has been an issue many years back, and then the state legislature has done a nice job of making that one vote so that the towns had something upon which to base what the UGA would be or more if they voted more later on. We
But
didn't get
when
that
you
this year.
you get the governor's budget, and then you get the Senate's budget, and those numbers they never work out to be anything to work with. So that's why we've always just used, the prior year, which would be the FY20 cherry sheet numbers for our estimates, and they're usually not so far off.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask, when we were talking about things we've already voted, the essential but over we voted some. Those are all in the model right now, right, Mike? Okay.
Mike, you're on mute.
Everything we voted is in the model.
Okay, so
Okay.
I mean, I suppose we could go
Unvote that. Whatever.
Though I think mostly what we did vote in was the really
Contractual.
essential one.
That's right.
Extra election.
Most of it was contractual.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
there was
There's still a
some,
number of items that need to be voted.
yeah, there was some stuff. There was some stuff there.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know how many pennies you're going to find on that.
Yeah.
We'll take a look at that.
40 grand.
Yeah.
Well, 40 grand is the compensated absences. And
Well, I
then
was thinking, we had that we goosed the facilities guy by 10 grand, stuff like that. I didn't look at it closely. I shouldn't have said 40 grand without looking more closely.
Yeah. I mean, some of it, the big ones that I found were like testing for PFAS at the landfill, which seems like you sort of have to do, or the extra elections, or, water bills being up, the compensated absences, and library maintenance, I think, was the other big one.
Yeah. But I do think there was some town planning. We could go after the K and P, whatever, K and P. Did we do I haven't looked at
I
it.
don't think
You didn't vote. You voted that down.
we voted.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Within the fire, I don't think there was a lot that was additional stuff. There was small amounts. And again, if people want to make a motion and suggest changes, that's, the task at hand. I agree with everything everybody said. I think the one thing though is I try to be practical, and the one thing is we don't know what we don't know, and I think the choice that we have is, do we want to throw a finger up in the air and say we have to do X% cut across the board, or do we want to move forward with a balanced budget without overrides? And I think that's the choice. And so what it really gets down to are the line items. And so then, I've talked to Kevin and gave him a heads up on how far off the model is. The schools know how far off the model is. So I think elementary needs to revisit. Kevin needs to revisit it. And in terms of FinCom, I think our levers are, do we change our tune and tell people they need to do cuts across the board or stick with the current plan? I'm open to whatever folks want to talk about. And then if it's sticking with the current plan, then it's, if it's cuts, is it what amount? And is it just everybody across the board? If it's with the current plans, then we need to look at our levers, and our levers are, I would not be for it, but you could apply additional free cash, but that's outside of our policy guidelines. I would not be for that. There's changing the assumption on the receipt. If anything, I think the state receipt assumptions could go lower. So
How much free cash do we usually apply to the levy again? 250?
What's 1% of the prior year's tax levy. So it's in this 260K zip code.
Yeah.
Although we've done more the last couple of years to take the top off the debt hump.
Right.
So that's why those numbers looked higher.
Yeah, last year we did 500K, the year before 478, and the year before that 176.
I gotcha. So,
John, if I could just jump in.
What?
Oh, sorry, John. I apologize. I just want to say real quick, if I can. I apologize to interrupt, but first and foremost, my apologies, folks, that I wasn't able to be here for the beginning of the conversation. Second, I did want to just say John and I have been talking, the Board of Selectmen and myself, we've been talking as well about the direction the budget's heading in. There's been a lot of really great work that's been going on behind the scenes in our budget, the town budget, as well as productive conversations I've been having with the schools, both schools. Obviously, I'm assuming the news was shared about the Masconomic number, which is good news. It was a good team effort getting that letter over, then the subsequent conversations. My feeling based on looking at Mike's model with Catherine today, we feel pretty comfortable and confident that model is something that represents accurately where we are. I think that talking with Scott and Steve, my hope would be is to take back and sort of where we are from balancing the budget standpoint and try to come up with the areas where the levers are that we can pull to try to get this budget balanced without an override. I think that's everyone's collective goal. I think we're within striking distance. And I think now that we've done the work that's been done over the last week or two to get the budget to where it is, specifically with the schools and the work that we've done to sort of identify places, I'm hopeful that given a little bit more time and going back to the schools, local schools, the Tri-Town, we might be able to get to a good place with regards to the budget by the next meeting.
So Kevin, the last school committee meeting, they did cuts and that the cut of roughly a little over $60,000 down from where they were, and looked at the banded sheets, they basically cut right down to where anything beyond is starting to look at cutting of services. So I'm not sure what conversations you've had with Steve and Scott, but I'm kind of curious to see if you thought there was anything more that could be cut without cutting services.
So if there's so it goes both ways too, right? So you guys, I heard the very tail end of where you were saying, looking at the town's operating budget, there's not really that many places to be able to shake loose. We went through it. I found $50 here, $1,000 there, to try to come up with those places where we can find savings. So it's a matter of how much is either body willing to cut, right? So there's going to be cuts where the budget's an operational deficit by its structural deficit. We're going to have to find places where we cut into the existing budget line items. I think everybody does. I had a very productive and positive conversation with the leadership at the schools, and including Charisse. And it seems to be some willingness to have a further conversation with myself and them to try to get it over the finish line. So I just wanted you to hear that from me. I know that there's been a lot of conversation. I apologize. I'm not going to be able to stay on the line much longer, but I did want to make sure I recognize some of the conversations that we've been having for the FinCom directly. So based on the model, Catherine, I know we talked as well before I sign off. And any other thoughts on the model? Because I think for my purpose is the model is what we're going to base where we can come up with the rest of the funding to get this thing balanced.
So on that, Kevin, when we look at the model, what we were talking about, Rick, before you jumped in there, we're talking about the theoretical amount of free cash that get applied. And to Mike Hartman's point, in the last 2 years, we did give. So Mike, I would say that the last 2 years, there was the kind of this 1% amount we applied, and then we applied an additional amount of free cash to help with the debt. And so it was like two amounts, even though the one, right? So John Guido personally is in favor of, applying, say, 260 grandish, basically 1%. I don't think we should use that much more free cash. If folks have a different point of view, let us know. And if we did that, I would also be in favor of trying to get the fire paid for in the base budget without an override, which tells me I think it's about $135,000 of cuts that would need to be identified from the current model.
Where are you going to get that from, John? I mean,
what's that?
Where are we going to get that from? I mean, it's already pretty lean. I don't see where we're going to pull it from.
Well, if you look at the compensation, I know it's something that we've all held our nose. We've had these conversations, but one item is the compensated absences. If we're willing to use free cash like we've done in the past, I know not last year, but the years prior to that, that's an opportunity to. I think it's $80,000 right there that we can make up. I don't know if 40 is built in, Mike, or not into your model, or if it's 40 net at this point or 80 net.
So all of the compensated absences was taken out of the budget and put into the warrant article this year. So we had a month ago with 80,000 in the budget that we voted in, remember, with the over guideline, and then it showed up on the warrant articles 100. So I did take the 80 out of the model in consultation with Catherine. So right now the compensated absences are all in the warrant, which I think is bad hygiene, by the way, but money's money.
So when you say it's in the warrant, sorry, I should know this. It means it's not in our bottom number here.
So it is in there. So it is in the amount over the levy because because the warrant articles are in there.
Down below. Yep.
Right. But when but now it comes out of free cash instead of raise and appropriate or something.
Right. Right. So it's no longer a warrant. I mean, it's no longer a levy issue. It removes that from the levy issue.
But I would say like 3 years ago, we went from compensated absences were always in the warrant article, and then just for hygiene reasons, we put it into the budget because it was an ongoing expense. Anyway, it's a philosophical thing, but.
I mean, there's an average amount every year, and then there's unique years where
and we're in a unique year, I guess. Yeah.
The other thing to be careful about, just because it's a warrant article doesn't mean it has to be free cash. It's how the articles are written, like the fire article is written.
Yeah. This year it's written as a free cash article.
Yeah. The fire coverage article is written as raise and appropriate right now, subject to an override. But
You're absolutely
it doesn't have to be synonymous.
Yeah. Anyway, but
so
it doesn't,
guys,
doesn't affect the amount over the levy. That's all.
Yeah.
Kevin, I think the important point here is that changing the compensated balances is not going to help us come in with a more balanced budget, right?
True.
Well, if it's as Mike explained it, where it's 100% pulled out, I thought there was still 40,000 in there that wasn't spoken. That was in the original. That I thought the additional $40,000 was taken out, but I'm hearing that $40,000 was built in originally.
I'm going to just double check it in real time, just because.
I could be wrong, Mike. I haven't. You know the model obviously way better than I do at this point.
Yeah.
That was my recollection.
I just double checked it. It's out.
It is out. Okay. So but that was an example. There's, it's now that we have a target to understand what the number is, it has to come from somewhere, right? So it's a matter of if I've got to get with the school folk. I've got some areas where, we might get creative on our end. There's no silver bullet by any means, but it just means we got to roll up our sleeves a little more and try to figure it out, because there's no other way. We've got to pull it together.
So Kevin, how much have you negotiated them down?
On who? In the schools?
No.
Well, that's the work. The hard work's been by your chair, I'd say, with conversations collectively by the rest of the FinCom, with sort of trying to push those and Eric too, obviously, to try to get to a point where they can bring it down. I mean, you mentioned, you look at the banded sheet that they provide you with. It's real. I mean, there's not much cushion, and the same goes for the operating budget for the town. But I mean, bottom line is we can't have an override. We got to figure it out.
We've been Mike, the conversations, I've been on the horn a lot, and the conversations are, look, the town's got to be in it together, and it's unfair for one group to pay carry the burden here. It's got to be, so I think that helped getting elementary to move where they moved to. But I think I've at least been signaling that I think they're going to have to go lower.
Yeah.
Okay. I was just sort of baiting you, Kevin and John. So, but I appreciate the serious.
No, it's good. It's real. We're getting close. We're in the red zone. We got to find a way to get this over the goal line. And I've said this publicly. I've said, I think at the last few meetings we've had, I'm committed to finding a way to balance this budget, especially in my first year. And I know everybody here is. So it's just a matter of it's shaking out those $500, $1,000 there. I mean, maybe there's a chunk or two we can come up with that gets us over that line. And, we look at, we talked about the COLA, for example, right? and that's 1.6 is where we landed on before all this happened. We go down to a 0%, that's $33,444 right there, that we can come up with. And that's for the non-union employees. So that's a place where we might be able to find some savings as well.
And then if Jen goes to one person instead of two, she can do it with 50,000 instead of 65.
That's 15.
Another 15.
It's going to be squeaky, but we're going to have to find a way to do it that way. We're going to have to find a way to come up with those every dollar and cent of this budget.
Kevin, before you jump, let's talk timeline real fast. So Kevin called that there's a slight update with the timeline because they were looking at the date that the ballot needs to get printed. And so it's, in an ideal world, we could have things approved next week for the cleanly with the ballot, but I think it's more of a go, no go on what, is there an override type of items on the ballot, because the selectmen have to finish the warrant, we have to finish up our voting. So I feel like things are coming to the head. It'd be great to come to a head by next Monday, but we go talk to the schools. The schools would have to meet and make cuts, and somehow we'd have to land the plane here all within today's Tuesday, right? So I don't know, it's new information that we keep learning. I don't know how we coordinate all of that, because people can't just meet and make cuts. People need to know where we're at. We're getting people feedback. They have to meet, but we need like a week or two here to bring everything to a head, I think. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Catherine, or Mr. Gann, or Mr. Spencer, Mr. Jackson, Kevin.
You're on, John. You're correct.
In 2 weeks at the max, in my opinion.
2 weeks and we're on the hunt for 140 grand.
I would say in a perfect world, it would be next week's meeting. We could balance it. I don't know if the schools are going to be able to meet and vote by then.
That's my target too. I want to at least get to a place where my goal would be to come to you folks next Monday and say we balanced the budget. That's my goal. John, like to your point right there, there might be some just limitations from process standpoint. But that's right now my goal is to get with the schools. I talked with Scott and Steve. I know they got to go to the school committee at the end of the day, and they need to make sure that they're comfortable. But we're going to have a real conversation and go pretty deep into their budget, like you folks have already done. But knowing that we have a target number now. Before it's like, let's bring the number down. Now we know what that number actually is, and we'll negotiate out what we can absorb on the town side and what they can on the school.
All right, thanks, Kevin. If you can keep Karen and myself in the loop on that too, just so we know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I again, my apologies, folks. I appreciate your understanding. I do need to sign off, but I do appreciate your support and all the work you guys have been doing. We're getting close. Thank you.
Kevin, we can talk tomorrow.
Yes, thank you, boy.
Go home, Kevin.
Kevin.
I would just like to add that I hate like hell to try to balance our budget on the backs of our employees and tell them that we're going to have 0% COLA. But these are tough times. This is what we got to do.
Inflation is like 1% right now.
I know.
But to that
you can make that case, Eric. No question.
But you can't be saying 0% here and they're getting 4% over here.
Right.
That's the problem.
That's the problem.
Yeah. I'm strongly.
But I think that's Kevin, what Kevin's saying, right? When he talked to you all saying, look, it's, let's get the evidence in front of me so that I can go back to the negotiating table, but we also recognize to our very early conversation, there will be people in, the private sector looking at this, knowing that they're going to have to take compensation reductions in order to maintain their position. And that's just the reality of where people
absolutely.
are right now.
You take the cut or lose your job. That's right. That's about what
you spread 1.6% of pain around to everybody, or 3 people lose their job. Take your pick. But
the problem is it's not everybody, but that's something for Kevin and the selectmen to sort out. John, one thing on the free cash, 1%, okay, 266,000, but if we end up needing for 10,000 at it, I'm not opposed to that. I don't want to see us, throw an extra 100,000 at it.
No, that's what I'm agreed. I agree with that. I just meant I don't see 400 or 500 grand going out of that. I think it's got to be as close to 250 as possible. If it's 260, if it's 270, those are the shades. Because I think keeping the assumption of the state aid and keeping that assumption at 150K are pretty important. If we bring the 150 down to 100, then I'd be in favor of lowering the. It's just gonna, move in sand, so it doesn't change anything.
I believe that we've got to be reasonably prudent with using those numbers, and I don't want to see you get carried away.
Could I ask a question of Catherine, given that Kevin signed off and I had just wanted to clarify on this? Was there anything, Catherine, that was still out on the list that we had not voted on that has been rescinded, so to speak, that you all have looked at and said, you know what, we're going to pull that right off the table? Or are those things still open items?
There's several items that are still open items, but there's a grouping of police overtime related items on the above guidelines, and there's been nothing stated that they've been rescinded.
Okay, so there wasn't anything that Kevin has gone back to the departments and said, you know what, we're not even going to leave that on the table. We're pulling that off at this point. There have just been some questions.
He may have to, but there's nothing that's been definitive yet. That's what he's trying to set it up so that he can go back and balance the budget and present it next week to you all.
Yeah, I'm just asking because I've had a few people approach me and ask questions, and I've tried to circle back to Kevin, and I know he's busy, but I haven't had a chance to connect with Kevin. So I was just wondering if there had been any trickle down to the departments on any of those items.
Well, I mean, there was some discussion at department head meeting today that that the COLA for the personnel bylaw individuals will be reduced to 0.
Okay, but nothing specific on, for instance, the engineering study or the police reference that you just made?
No, I have not heard anything on those.
Okay.
All right. So I think what we have to do is just articulate this back to the schools. Kevin's been in, obviously got dialogue with this. The question is, I think for our meetings, I know next week we're meeting on Monday. Do we need to post a second meeting next week, or do we just go Monday and the following Monday? Maybe we post it. We can always cancel it.
Post it and you can always cancel it.
I would agree.
Wednesday, Thursday, maybe Thursday.
Thursday to push it as far as we can.
Yeah.
I guess that means we could do Friday, but
that would not be good.
Thursday.
Friday about 6:30 at night, 7:30 at night. Okay.
Unless we're doing it with cocktails, John, I don't think so.
Already have
Fridays are not good days.
Already have virtual cocktail meetings set up on Friday with my team.
Messing with my cocktail schedule.
All right. We mentioned cocktails and Lynn shows up. I like it. Interesting.
She was right on time.
That's how she sells houses. She gets them drunk and.
Yeah. So let's do Monday at 7 and then the Thursday at 7. That work for everybody?
Yep.
And again, if anybody wants to, or we can't change the mission again. So everybody's going to try to thread that needle on that 135K-ish number. If we want people to go to cuts, now's the time we have to change that too.
So you want to talk about cuts now?
We're talking about in general. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
The goal is, do we accept that we're going to target a budget that gets us to the levy? Or are we talking about going below the levy so that we have below that?
Well, keep in mind that the current model has 150,000 built in above the levy.
Yeah. Which is,
that's an insurance on the receipt. So yes.
Let's hear from my colleagues first.
We want to say 10% cut across the board or something like that we did, 2 years after the market crashed in the financial downturn. That's the.
I would prefer that this is not the year we'd want to do that.
I agree, and that's how we're collecting.
Now we may have to do that next year. I mean, we don't know. I mean, if
most likely we're going to be having to do that next year.
If things flow through, if the economy, we get a second wave, if the economy gets hit even further, jobs be lost and they never come back.
But that'll be off of a more clearer picture than just our.
That's right.
So I'm comfortable with that.
And we clearly keep track of the revenues. I mean, we'd be keeping track of the revenues throughout the year, and there would be nothing stopping these groups from doing a spending freeze at any time if it looked like there was trouble.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is if we there's a different way to look at this. If we put this budget together and it approves, and suddenly state receipts go down, Mike, this is where they're going to have to find the savings. The town and the schools would have to find it because they can't overspend. So, God forbid if it happens, Mike, it's a way that you look at things, and I'll say this because I'm struggling with it. I like planning with a perspective of things are going to be worse than they actually are, and then you're great. But if you go in at a budget of 26 or 33,666,925 to raise, and state income receipts drop by 500,000. We've already approved the budget. The town has to find it, or there's another meeting, right? So from this perspective, going in at a secure place, in effect,
do we think receipts are going to drop by 25%?
I'm just, Eric, I'm using examples. I'm not.
Well,
I'm using it. If it went down, they'd have to find it, right?
Yes.
A while ago, when I was talking about the fact that we may have new facts in 6 months, right. And Eric said, "Well, what kind of facts do you expect?" Well, if we find out that we've got $500,000 less income than we had when we set the budget, then at that point in time, we go back to people and say, these are the facts, and we got to.
One data point.
Yep. Masco's budget, $6 million of Masco's budget comes from state, one way or another.
Mostly in the Chapter 70.
Yeah.
And
keep in mind that Kevin also had reduced the 300,000 pay-as-you-go for capital with the idea that that money would go into the stabilization fund, in the event of a rainy day.
That's right.
Yeah. So the point being is that even at this secure budget, all we're doing is we're passing the responsibility. If we think things are worse, we're passing it off to the town to have to and us working with them to deal with it in the future. But we're locked in at those numbers. So.
I mean, we've talked about it now, and that's how it's been done the last.
Yeah, but see, you guys are trying to deal with the facts as we know them now.
That's right.
And that's where we got to go.
And we're playing the middle of the road here. We're not being, hyper conservative, where we're looking to, do significant cuts, but we're also not being flippant and, padding it when it comes in. I think we're drawing a middle ground here until things work through. That's my view of it, anyway.
Yeah,
I agree.
When we did make the big cuts a couple years after the economy tanked, it basically took 8 years after that to get everything back to kind of the same level of service. And
right. Yeah, no, it's meaningful.
To do too much right now, you're going to find yourself clawing back.
Well, or you end up in a position where you've cut some and it's not deep enough, and now you got to cut again.
That's right.
So you're applying pain twice rather than just saying, "Look, this is the reality of it."
Which nobody likes. Anybody. I mean, anybody that's worked in any organization gets fatigued, and they come back, and then they come back again, and then they come back again, and you don't want to be in that position.
So, John, is the position that you were putting out there that we were going to ask for an additional 130,000 in cuts somewhere in what's being proposed for the budget, and that's the number that you're trying to get us to agree is what we're going to put out there as a high water mark for people to hit.
That's directionally it, right? I mean, that's like, we all haven't voted a bunch of stuff. So it's basically giving people the temperature of the committee is that we could apply 250, 260 of cash. The temperature of the committee is we'd like to get behind the support of the fire. And the temperature of the committee is we don't want overrides. And the temperature of the committee is we don't want those things funded separately. So in order to do that, and the temperature of the committee is to keep the state receipt where it is and the 150 assumption where it is, that means there'd be $135,000 of savings in the town budgets and most likely elementary schools in order to get that. So that's what I was contemplating. Now, if we want to change that tune and say we got to find an additional, 260 grand, we could talk about doing that. But my point is, go on the next week, change that tune if we're trying to move forward.
No, I think you got a short time frame here. I mean,
all I'm saying is, since it's my job to sort of bring us to kind of to a head here, we kind of had an emergency one of these meetings with the selectmen to try to figure out what was going on. We did a lot of brainstorming, and then we were like, all right, let's try to work toward our original date. And then we got everybody got redlined, and we said, all right, we can now move the town meeting. Moderator moved the town meeting. Selectmen voted that. We said, okay, let's take some more time. We've been inching our way there, and now it's like we kind of have one or two more FinCom meetings until there's a warrant that we've signed off on and everything goes to print. So before we pass, my opinion is whatever we decide right now, unless something crazy happens in the next week, the FinCom shouldn't change its opinion on those things. All that stuff that we all feel and we all had doubt, agreed. So we could say, hey, let's just do 1/12 budget at a time. We could say, well, let's do cuts. We could say, let's land the plane, at this 135 and kick the can, for lack of a better word, of let's face the real pain once we know what we're really facing and what that battlefield is.
I think you're going to have a huge challenge just finding the 135.
Okay.
Can I put out
in 2 weeks? In 2 weeks.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so I'm on record. I think there's $300,000 to $400,000 we could take out of the budget and not do anything. I mean, just between the warrant articles and some of the budgets and some of the raises, I think it's there.
The free cash doesn't help.
Not the free cash. I mean, I'm talking about all these things. We add them all up. I think there's $300,000 we can pull out of there.
$300,000 without firing anybody. Without firing anybody.
Well, if you hold schools at guideline, you get 200 right off the bat, and then
that's going to mean likely dismissal of personnel.
People.
I'm not looking to fire anybody.
That's good. Did that.
I'm not looking to fire anybody.
I'm just holding people at guideline. I think the schools have a problem if they can't hold guideline and they have to fire people. I think that's a problem that shouldn't.
There's a bigger structural issue there that's not going to get solved in 2 weeks.
It's going to have to get solved sometime, or not.
It's going to have to be addressed. We can't keep running away.
All right. As we're talking about it, I think there's $300,000 to $400,000 we could take out of the budget without seeing a big change.
Can I? Sorry. Go ahead, Mike. So does that mean the items that are left that we did not vote one way or another on, we're making the assumption that those are not, we are going to resolve those to no action because those are not currently in Mike's model. And so the number that I'm trying to get at the math. So
this is the math. So Karen, the ones that we haven't voted are the articles that wrap these other core assumptions into the same numbers. So if there's an item we haven't voted that's not in the model, we have an issue, but everything should be accounted for.
That's my question are the items, I thought from what Mike had said, if we hadn't voted to move it forward that it's not in the model. I'm just looking for clarification. So if I'm looking at,
if we voted no action, it's not in the model. If we voted positive action, it's in the model. Yeah.
right, but if we haven't voted, which there are some significant numbers in there that we did not vote, are those in the model or not in the model?
No, only what's voted is in the model.
Those are, Mike's model has elementary at its current cut, right? So elementary cut down to a number. Mike's model assumes, and that's why it's all theoretical, if the FinCom supported the current elementary number, Mike's model currently has the current elementary number in that model.
That I have. I'm talking about the items coming out of the operating budget for town. So when I'm looking at, for instance,
example,
$12,000 for the police wages on overtime.
Not
in the budget.
It's not in the budget, right? So what I'm saying is, are we taking the position tonight that if we have not already voted positive action, that those are going to be, we're going to vote tonight to push all of those to no action? Because otherwise we're changing the number from your 135 to some other number.
The examples you're using are the resurfacing of the tennis courts, which I know people are saying we're going to find another way. The town hall and library telephone systems.
Right.
Sure.
The
engineering study for the library. There's still $9 grand sitting out for that. There's,
Right.
Roughly, there's another 45,000 that were in the above guidelines that has not been voted.
So we should.
Right.
So are we saying it's 180,000, or are we saying we're sticking
my bid would
with-
be if it's above guideline, it's out at this point. I mean, it's,
well, but
That's the schools too, though. It's everything.
right.
That's back to guideline versus you have to hold them all to the same accountability.
I guess I'd say it this way. If one of those items we decided to vote in favor for, we would have to find that cost saving something else. Like the 135 is the math of the collective. Things can move in and things can move out to land the plane at 135. All I'm saying is we should at least have our guidance be consistent, and then we can figure out what all line items are in or out between now and when everything's done. That's the work in front of us.
right. Level surface.
There's so much, to your point, there's so much that needs to still be done that we can't in a week decide that we're all of a sudden going to say we need to cut more, because then we haven't made any real traction toward the goal line.
Yeah, I guess my point is, should we give help? Should we aid Kevin in this work by getting through the rest of those items and at least giving him guidance on where we sit, and does that number adjust from the 135 that he's got to go find? So for instance, if we say we absolutely would prefer that the engineering study for the library go forward this year, that means he's got to find another $6 grand somewhere.
No, because that was out of free cash.
I'm just using that as an example, Karen. I'm just saying, if there's something on that list of over guidance that we have not, is there anything on there that we're adamant that we would like to see move forward? And does that change the guidance we're giving Kevin to say, go find?
An example would be the flu clinic for $3,700 was tabled.
I'd say we might decide as a group that should be in the budget this year. I'm just saying.
Yeah. You might, optics might be a little challenging with that one right now.
We're saying no to it. But I think Karen makes a point, is that there is something up there we need to check.
Can I just ask, John, we had voted on everything at the board, either up or down on every warrant that was on the table. Have those been passed over to you and incorporated into the model? It sounds like there are some things you might not know what we voted on.
Yeah, so we have taken action on most items that have the monetary value. There's a handful that have none. But there are ones like the home rule petition we have not, for example. So it's funny. It's like such a, but there's things like the fire we voted for, and then it moved where it was a few times, right? So it's just a lagging effect that we have to. So there's a lot of cleanup voting we need to do, and we want to do that once we have the picture there. But every meeting, everybody's had an opportunity to make motions on any warrant article item or any item, over guideline for us to consider as a group. But I think we've been all trying to figure out what the target we're trying to shoot is. And that's why we've been trying to understand what the clear picture is. And I think today's the first day we had a pretty clear picture as to where we are. So I know that's not a perfect answer. A lot of it there's still some outstanding items. I think there's very few that are dollar amounts that truly haven't been voted, but there are a few. There's like under 10, something like that. And some of them are all edge ones that could be in or out depending on what that picture is, what we're trying to solve for. And so that's the why that we haven't done that voting yet.
Okay, so you have everything you need from us. You know all of our votes, and then you can, decide up or down in your opinion, action, no action.
Kevin's going to get us the latest version of the warrant, and there's some stuff's happening right now. But we will have everything that we need, and we have a version that's pretty close. If our committee wanted to go through some more of that detail right now, but the most of the voting that's left is the articles like the home rule petition, and then articles that tie in the overall budget numbers, and that's done the night that the budget's completely balanced. Karen Dow, correct me where I'm misspeaking.
There are some over guideline amounts in Catherine's omnibus budget sheet that, well, Karen Duvall already said, like the police overtime. We hadn't voted those yet, and those are significant, or the vaccines. There is 34,000 in the salary reserve that Catherine says still needs to be voted. Is that in the model or not?
The salary reserve, I'll go check. Hang on.
And there's another 15 in the unemployment.
Right.
So I think I just want to double check. Thank God I said
salary reserve actually went down.
It went down. Okay. To the right number? I'm going down.
It went from 91 to 85.
Okay. I think I remember that.
And so we're covered on the salary reserve. The model already has what we really need on the salary reserve.
The 85,000 in the budget it would be enough, and it has not been voted. And the amount of the over guideline items that haven't been voted is 31,604.
Yeah.
So
and most of that's in police.
No, there's 85,000. Hey,
Most
I
of it's in
way
police.
behind. Okay.
So then I'm confused because I see the last three items on here totaling $64,000.
Yeah, well, are they budget items?
Yeah.
They're noted as over guideline. So
Yeah, but where's the cap?
So Karen, you're looking at the spreadsheet, the FY20
Yes.
omnibus budget votes spreadsheet. That was
Yeah.
part of this. Just to make sure we're all on the same, okay.
And it's in the over guideline sections.
Section,
And
right.
they're noted as need to vote,
Need
but
to vote.
it sounds like even though we haven't voted positive action, they're in the model.
So
No,
Catherine, you know all three are in. Mike's saying no.
no. What are you talking about?
I don't have
Where's the salary reserve number we're looking at?
So we're looking at the spreadsheet, the FY 2021 omnibus budget votes, Excel spreadsheet.
Okay.
Line 57, 51, no, 57, 50, and 49.
57.
52, sorry.
52, 51, and 59. 49, yeah.
Okay, so 52 is not in there. No, none of those. If they're not in there, no. 52 is not in there.
51.
51 is not.
You should, yeah, well,
51 is in there.
yeah, because it was voted.
Yeah, 50.
Yeah. 50 is 50's in there. Anything that was positive actions in there.
50 was not positive.
50 was not voted.
It says line 50
No.
says
No,
library.
sorry.
Item
Let me be
number
clear.
50,
Let me be clear.
unemployment.
Hang on, guys. Sorry. Mike, there's the Excel number, and then there is next to that, to the right of it, the
Got
number. We're using the number column, not the Excel.
Okay, gotcha. The unemployment fund is not in there.
So that's another 15,000.
So the original budget that went out was dated January 2nd, And then the second one that went out with changes on it was February 12th. So those are the only two budgets that you've received. Then when the FinCom started voting, we have a third one going, which is the third version of the budget. And it doesn't have, neither the second or the third have any dollar amounts in salary reserve, unemployment, or the fire and police indemnity leave under over guidelines.
Yep, that's true.
So do we need the over guideline, a document to be adjusted so that we know what we're working to?
Well, it was, an email did go out with the changes that had happened with the over guidelines, just as a crossover. And the idea was that we didn't want to have too many versions of the detailed budget. So we only have two versions of the detailed budget. So I was able to quickly go back to see exactly what you could have possibly have seen at one point. But so the salary reserve initially was described as being a placeholder. We did some more calculations with it. It had 91,000 in it from last year, partly because of the whole 66,000 was allocated to the police. So that was a budgeted line item. When we did the actual numbers for this year, we came up with approximately 85,000. So that's actually a reduction of 6,000 from one year to the other.
Right.
The unemployment fund, we don't have anything in.
Right.
The compensated absences, there is $40,000 that was in that was voted that then has been since taken out. And then the police indemnity, we removed it because there's currently a balance of 66,000.
Okay, so we can vote all those on your still to be voted sheet. There's no action and we'll be fine.
Yes.
And so they're not in the model and they don't need to be in the model.
Yeah. So the ones that were tabled was line 47, which is 4,039 for the library.
Mm-hmm.
Computer expenses for the library.
Right.
Yeah, the flu vaccine. Yeah, the flu vaccine also for 3,700.
Yeah.
The inspectional iPads for the iPads for the inspectional services at 400. Cleaning service. Oh no, I'm sorry, not the cleaning service. $900 for firearms instructors, detectives, court officers. The stipends for the police.
Mm-hmm.
$8,450 for
police training.
The training wages. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the night differential, $1,900, and then the police overtime for holidays, $12,215.
Yeah.
And I think that's it.
There was one police wages special pay 900. You said that. Did you say that?
Oh,
That's the stipend.
So in the spirit of level service, what items in there would we consider that we would need to vote positive action on for level service? It doesn't sound like any of them.
Well,
Some of the police ones.
for the expenses for the OT for the police?
Well, the problem is this is a reflection that we never really drilled into as deeply as we probably should have, that what they did last year to make a savings, they're now coming back to eat into some of that savings.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right. But I look at it like iPads for inspectional services. Like that's not
agreed.
a requirement for level service. So
Right.
small money, but
And $400. Yeah.
it doesn't matter. It's consistent with the theme.
Some of the police wage items could be considered during the transfers from the reserve, the salary reserve,
But
as the contracts are negotiated.
I mean, I'm not the police liaison, but their budget before this stuff is healthy.
Yeah, I think what I've been able to grasp is what Shay is saying, which is there's, the monies they proposed were going to be savings last year. They're finding themselves in a position where they want to claw back some of that. And that's why it's going over guideline.
They have a new chief coming in who's presumably making less than the old chief, maybe.
Don't know.
Still under negotiation.
I was going to say the claim by the police when they shared the budget with the Board of Selectmen was that it's still going to work. It just takes 2 years to implement. So, you don't get all your savings at the beginning, is what they were saying. You won't see.
But this is an increase from the savings of last year. So it's almost like they're going in the opposite direction.
Right.
They're not achieving more savings. It's that they're coming back and said to us, here's an added expense.
Right. No, I'm not defending it. I'm just saying we questioned it too quite a lot.
Yeah.
I still don't feel that we've had a clear, I've seen the numbers, it's hard to assess. I have some understanding that yes, you estimated something, you're finding it's not quite working out as you expected. There's an increase in some of the wages. I understand that some of it is just through, salary increase, just by whom is still remaining on force and things of that nature. So, and I think obviously now you're going to look at the next 2 months or the last 2 months and it's all going to be skewed as well, right? Because they've had extra people servicing. So I guess I'm neutral. I know that's probably not a great place to be as the liaison. I'm neutral. So, if we were to turn back and say, look, you've got to figure it out with level dollars than what you've been able to expend, based on the budget from last year. If that's how the committee was directing, I would say that's fine.
Well, we're not saying level dollars, we're saying level service.
I'm saying levels, right. I'm saying but they would argue level service requires them to increase the dollars.
But with respect, they are getting over 6% increase.
Yeah, right. I'd tell them, never mind.
So it's not level service, with level dollars, they already have a 6% increase in their cost. And they're coming back and saying, and we also need these things because we're not going to achieve as much as we thought we'd achieve from the savings from last year. Or they're added costs because of the changes we made.
I think what was presented is that by hiring 2 additional police officers, we would be able to reduce the overtime such that we could offset the salary of the officers. But what was not included was all the associated expenses that went with 2 additional police officers. And that's what we're seeing go up. All those other line items, firearms, training wages, night differential, holiday, those were not included when you did the calculation. The 2 additional officers would save you money.
Yeah.
And I don't argue that there still isn't a savings. It's just not as much as they anticipated, I guess, is where I would come down.
Do you think that was intentional?
Well, the budget wasn't supposed to go up 6%
I had sort of been under the impression they considered all these extra little bits and pieces, or tried to. Yeah. Again, not having that crystal ball, but maybe they missed some. But if Karen's feeling sort of neutral, maybe we don't need to up our find the cuts amount, or maybe we need to up it 10,000 because of flu shots and something else. But then again, 10,000, you could take an extra 10,000 out of free cash and not kill yourself.
Well,
I think the big one is the overtime. I think some of these other ones are unfunded mandates within the police department, ignoring the 6% increase or not. The overtime was tied to the addition of 2 staff. Having 2 more staff now get paid on holidays. And that should have been part of that assessment, and I thought it was. But some of these other things, the training ones they're talking about and the firearms, I'm not advocating for them. I'm just saying that, there are things in there that are separate of the addition of staff, or and the reduction in call police.
Yeah, I mean, a part of that is because of who's having to now perform training, because some people are retiring, and so the rates are going up. There is some additional mandates, so I would agree on that one that, you know, I could be in favor of that. I do agree with Jay. I just have yet to get to a place where I'm confident in that $12,000 being necessary.
Yeah.
And not being something that should have been accounted for or is accounted for somewhere else.
Or well explained.
Yeah, but on that item line, like last year it was 6 police officers. Now it's going up to 8 police officers. Why do we need 2 more officers?
Because the point was the 2 officers were the addition, and that's where so the point was you had on-call people who are their reserve officers who were covering some of that stuff. So they weren't getting holiday pay, and in addition, you weren't getting this double pay. So when there's a holiday, and I'm going to partially explain it, but also confuse the heck out of all of us because I'm confused as well. But when they did
the 8 bodies last year and 8 bodies this year, or is it 6 and 8?
It was 6 and 8.
6, yes. There's 6 permanent full-time officers versus 8 versus 6.
Yeah.
Philosophically, the chief has been moving away from using the reserves, right? Trying to because they're having difficulty maintaining reserves, right? So they're trying to move away from a needed staffing model, a model that requires them to have the reserves because they're just not able to find them. They're losing them to other towns. People aren't picking up the extra shifts, whatever it is. And that was part of the justification for needing the 2 full-time permanent additional people as well. So what you're seeing is, okay, well, then if we're going to pay overtime as we have to for holiday pay, to Jay's point, the calculation changes because you're not being able to pay a reserve rate. Now you're paying, double time for, a permanent full-time person to work that time frame. So the actual average rate for the holiday pay goes up versus what you were paying because you had a reserve bringing the rate down. If that makes sense to everybody.
The board actually pushed back on the amount of overtime that was still in that budget because we said there should be no need for this overtime if you hired the 2 officers. That was the whole point. You would reduce the overtime if you hired the officers. And they were concerned that the transition, they needed some money in that bucket as they hired people and trained them and brought them up to speed. And they did take a reduction. They did come back and reduce that amount. It was not as much as we had requested. And it's something we could go back to the new chief on and see if there's something that he could do in that area.
In some ways, I guess it's almost a fundamental question at this point. It's been about a year now that we are dealing with the 2 additional police officers to save money. If you're getting the sense that we're not saving the money, then perhaps we should be looking at not hiring a replacement for the position that's opening up because Sergeant Hovey is becoming the police chief. We'll promote somebody to be sergeant, but then then the backfill to a patrolman would be inappropriate if we're not saving money. So that's why it's only a year into it. But if we're getting the sense that there's an issue, I think the new chief Hovey would want to take a hard look as to whether he wants to bring on a replacement patrolman.
And a year is a good amount of time to do that assessment.
I think so.
We've done it for a year. So if it's not working.
I don't disagree with that, but my recollection was they said one new police officer didn't work. It was only with 2. So I'm not sure how long they'll be going with 1 if you're going to reduce it by 1.
Has there been a decision on the new chief yet?
Yes. Yeah. Sergeant Hovey has been offered the job. We're doing the negotiation, and it'll be complete once the negotiations are accepted.
It's very close.
Hopefully, it's close to a done deal. Yes.
So, to Karen Duvall's point about what's our target, if we were saying, well, right now we're sort of 70,000 over or 75,000 over plus 50,000 for the fire coverage, that would be 125,000 over. But maybe we want to say 135,000 to allow for flu shots and a couple other little things that are on the over guidelines, and see where we get to.
Mhm.
And if we need another 5,000 of free cash to make it work, well, we can do that. But see what Kevin and the schools come up with between them, because it does seem like it's in the 130 to 150,000 neighborhood that we really need.
So are there still items that the FinCom has not voted on that should be going into that budget? So we have a solid number to give to Kevin and the schools to say, this is what we need to reach?
Well, there's one ATM. They put a math program as a capital item, which could argue that it should be part of their regular budget.
The 85,000?
Or 80, something like that.
There's that. And then there are these items in the operating budget, like the $3,700 for flu vaccines and $4,000 for library.
Yeah, I guess so. So Lynn, the FinCom does not like to be the gatekeeper of what's in or what's out. And so what ends up happening is we try to get a read of each group in each department has their own budgets and their own needs, and we're trying to figure out, well, how far are we off? And the thing is, the handful of these items that are left are like the handful of items that, the night that we balance the budget in a normal year, you have a much clearer picture and you're on a normal timeline, and you sit down and we got the banded chart of the schools, we have a banded chart for the town, and we have the handful of items that we haven't voted. And we try to have a conversation around what's in and what's out and how do you thread that needle. And so it's a bit of an iterative process. So some of these things, I would think many of us are on the fence on. I could vote them up, I could vote them down, depending on what does that mean to Kevin's budgets and what does that mean to the schools. It's like a trade-off. You're like, and how do you weigh those things, right? And so each time, so I think Masco went and made some pretty deep cuts. I think elementary schools got to a decent spot, hoping they can come up with more. Maybe Kevin can come up with more, and then there's going to be a smaller list. And when we balance the budget, you figure out how do you tie all those together. So that's what you're sensing, is that I don't know if the finance committee has the knowledge of the capital K on all these things. Like, would I like to see the inspectional iPads in? Yeah, but if it's inspection iPad, that's a small dollar amount. But say there's a $2,500 item. There's three $2,500 items and two can get in. It's like, well, how do you solve that? And we like to have that decision made by more than just us in a vacuum. And that's why it's not as so Karen Dow was talking about, and how I was talking about at the beginning, like, could you take, if all of a sudden two items that are out that could be in, if you move the 260 of cash up to 265, we could do that to balance. So there's like little tweaks like that we like to make, as opposed to that item's in, that item's out. So what we do is we start by voting, okay, all the guideline stuff's in. Here are the things above guideline. Well, trash services, that's contractual. You have to go for that, vote that in. So you end up having these items that are left. Some we needed more clarification on. That police overtime was more clarification on. And I forgot if it was, Karen Duvall, maybe you either weren't at that meeting or the numbers are moving around too much. Too much has happened too quickly. So I can't remember exactly what that was, but that's why some of those things don't get voted. And others, like training wages, the vaccines, and the iPads, it's like, well, it's not clearly out, it's not clearly in. They're kind of bubble cases.
Okay, I was just trying to check to see if you had everything from us, all of our votes, our input, to help do that final trade-off and, working towards that number.
Karen Dow and Karen Duvall and other FinCom members speak up, but I feel that if the schools and Kevin know that we need to solve this $130,000, $140,000, $150,000 delta, we see what they come up with, and then we take it, and then these items left to try to figure out how do you balance it. That's, I think, the next FinCom meeting. That would be my gut. we could, and if anybody wants to vote any of these now, we can entertain any of that, like any meeting, we can bring any of these things up. I don't know if it really changes the overall picture though. I think we're, every time we push on the schools, they find something, they might not be able to find anymore. If they don't find any more, most of these things are probably, well, we have a bigger problem. But anyway, I think as it gets late, I get less precise with my language. Apologies.
John, could I just clarify one thing?
I lose my edge at 9:15, so I'm surprised he hasn't said it.
John, could I clarify one thing about the warrant? The only warrant that is the valid warrant is the 4.1. Did you say there was additional warrant or something? That's the one you're working from, right? 4.1. The only one we, the board, know about.
Yeah, I just had an email to Kevin to make sure we're looking at the right that's the one we have. Yes.
4.1. Great. Okay.
4.1's in the model.
Great. Thank you.
I think.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Karen.
No, I was going to say, my point was simply more general. I know we went off on a tangent relative to the police, but in the general terms being, yes, trying to understand what that swing was. And if we're saying, Catherine's saying it's actually 44,000, if we say we're contemplating clipping the 12, 13 grand out, then we're somewhere in the ballpark of $30,000. That's not in the model. That's not accounted for. That could potentially swing one way or another. And if we're comfortable saying, we're willing to are we saying that we're willing, if we got to the point where we told Kevin, look, 130 is what we're looking for, we've got a delta of 30 hanging out elsewhere, or we tell him 150, and then we say, okay, we're comfortable cushioning that a little bit, knowing we don't really want to, but if they can get down to a final number and cuts and other give backs and we're all comfortable, then we could move forward. I'm just trying to get us to a place where come next week,
yes,
we're not having this conversation again. That's all I'm trying to get to, is understand the math, understand where we all, and we can all contemplate it a little bit over the next week. And if we're going to tell Kevin 135, I'd argue maybe we tell him 150 and see how close they can get. And then we say, then we will take it back to your point and say, how much are we willing to give in addition to get them to the finish line, to get it to the finish line. And to your point, we may come back next week and say, you know what, you got us there, but we're still not feeling that this extra $8 grand is necessary. And we're going to vote, no action on it. And, you decide from there.
I think you're right, Karen. As long as Kevin knows what hasn't been voted yet from the over guidelines, and even what has been voted, because if he looks at one of the things we voted yes on and says, nope, then fine. It doesn't matter that we voted yes.
He's done all the emails. He has all the trackers. I told him to look at that, and I told him there's a handful of items out there as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think you could. It's 130 to 170 grand. It's a wide.
There's $95,604 worth of items we hadn't voted on.
Does that include the ones we've already said we just clarified pulling off?
Yeah,
the 15,000 and the 30?
The 15 to 15 and the 34 are included in that. They are included in that 94,000. So
right. So that doesn't count because those are in the model.
Those are part of the modal. So, but just to understand.
The point is that the amount that's not in the model is like, I think
30,
it's
34. It's $31,000.
31, right?
Okay.
So back to the matter is we're looking for. There aren't any big numbers that we're going to find, so we're looking at smaller numbers all the time. And with that in mind, I would be willing to question, why do we need to spend, what is it, $3,700 for flu vaccines?
Right.
When you can go to, anybody can go to CVS and get a free shot. I don't know why we need to do stuff like that. And when times are tough, when we got extra money, it's okay, but we're looking for every nickel and dime that we can.
So there was something about this where we have to go back to the Board of Health and talk to Susan into that, because they actually felt that they could make money off of this. Because they charge back to, if they collecting it, they charge back to the insurance companies. for each of the flus shots that are delivered, and it's actually more than, with the administration, they get to charge back more. But so it becomes one of the things of, okay, how do you do this without actually needing this extra money to get this extra revenue? And
I think to her point, yeah. Sorry.
Could be right, Jay.
Yeah.
No, that's exactly what it was. And so there's a whole debate about, it's a way that they reach out to many of the elderly population. Yeah. It's inclusive of town, but it's additional services and there's revenue and offsetting costs. And it's like, it's hard to know where to draw the line, right? Especially when you're the finance committee. I don't know if it's our call to determine what our town, what services our town should or should not offer, right? We're trying to figure out how to come up with a balanced budget and weigh the input of everybody who's elected and appointed and on all those committees, right? So I think many folks in town would want to have that, and others would. I mean, it's unclear, right? And that's why we hadn't voted it yet. It's like,
we know we didn't have it last year. This is a new line item over.
No, it's in addition to the line item.
Right. It got funded for last year out of what was the budget?
Was it there was, what's the other piece that she was covering? They took money out of. I'll have to look at my notes.
They grabbed it from a different, not Rob, but they grabbed the line item from something else. But
yeah, that's a problem then, right? They're grabbing money here and offering services there. I mean,
but that's,
they got caught.
It's all within other, so they can do that.
Sure. Okay. So they should keep it in other then, and just keep it there.
Well, I think part of this was an ask for clarification to get back to what Shay was saying, which was, so have it all where it needs to be in an appropriate bucket so that you can actually look to see that you're offsetting cost with the refunds.
Sure. So do you think the other went down on the Board of Health then by the equivalent amount?
No, because their dead animal piece has gone up.
Right.
It used to be it wasn't distributed.
But we paid for the dead animal. We have voted that, right?
Yeah, it might have been.
Part of this was that they needed to go with the other part of it was the increase was due to the high dose. They had to go with the high dose vaccine.
I'm just getting at it. It wasn't there last year. It's there this year. If it's a service they stole from Peter to pay Paul, do it again.
Well, the only reason I brought it up was the fact that those are the kind of little things we need to be looking for in the next week to say, these are the kind of services that would be nice, but can we afford those nice things when we're looking to try to balance a pretty serious deficit?
One of the other things we talked about at the board was that the Board of Health is wonderful and they're trying to offer so many services, but they were asking for additional hours because they couldn't handle the work that they had. So now the number of people coming in to get the flu vaccine is increasing, although to Boyd's point, this vaccine is available at no cost 3 miles down the street. So yes, from a reaching out and a community standpoint, we would love to do this, but do we have the manpower and the cost? Because it is not completely covered. We don't get all the money back. So this is a nice to have service, but if we're looking for $3,700 to offset something else, this is something to look at.
Yeah, it's not moving the needle on 150 grand right now.
You're right, Eric, and that there's got to be a bunch of
no pun intended, moving the needle.
There's got to be a bunch of other things that go along with that $3,700 to move the needle.
Catherine and Jen, I want for next week if we can update this sheet. So Catherine, you're sign off on all the numbers in the voter tracker, and we'll move the ones that we haven't voted on a different color and make it very clear up top what the dollar amounts, where Catherine, you signed off on the updated dollar amounts, just so it's very, very specific. So as we vote stuff in and out, we can see what's happening with the total numbers. So we should coordinate on that between now and Monday's meeting.
So the question you had originally asked, John, way back before Karen made the really good point, and we went through this, was, do we generally think we should be targeting the 3% and getting to
That's
this?
all I was asking. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was still there
so
before we figure out what the number is.
So to your point, John, I personally, I'll share mine. I think that what I shared earlier was more of a comment of, look, I think going to 3% is the appropriate, or to our target and our goal, and trying to stay at the levy is the right place to be. It just means that if we have any assumptions that come in, it's going to be borne by Kevin and by the administration next, during the fiscal year of having to address it at that point, which, there becomes much less flexibility to just smooth it out.
Or like the last two downturns, it didn't affect this current fiscal year. It affected
the fall.
No, even the next fiscal year.
The following, yeah.
We all suspect that this is different and will affect us sooner. We don't know if it's this fiscal year or next fiscal.
Right.
That's what we know.
Right.
Huge. This is a huge unemployment number.
So.
Yep.
So my perspective is staying at the levy is, and where we are here is getting to that number is the right place to be for now.
Karen, Lou, Mike, what are your thoughts? Eric and Che gave us their opinion.
My thoughts are clear, right? I think we tighten our belts more than we need to, because we've got, I think, two rough years in front of us. But I'm always on the cheap side. So, it's like a broken clock is, right twice a day.
I think we strictly stay at the 3% and try to enforce that or stake to that as consistently as possible across the board. That would be my preference. I don't think that there'll be cash flow issues necessarily next year, but they will be coming the year after. Whether or not I don't think we need to be that conservative going into this year. And I think at the 3%, that strikes the right balance.
Yeah, the concern really for the only variability for next year is state, right?
Right.
It is possible that there will be a little bit less received and people going into owing, back taxes and not paying their taxes on time.
Yeah, well, we got that trash contract's going to come up again, and I don't think we're going to get the same deal we get this year.
True. Okay. But the point being is, all I'm trying to say is that, the only variable that turns rapidly right now, I think, or the biggest variable would be the state aid.
Yeah, right.
Everything else is more of that's the only one that could do this that I'm thinking of, whereas all the rest, it's more of a trend-based approach.
Sure.
Yeah, with the averaging on the local receipts, the 3-year averaging, I think that's right. Jen told me that the ambulance receipts are over $200,000 for the year now, for example, and they're not budgeted as being that high. So I think I already said, I think if we get to the levy limit in Mike's model that has a cushion in it, I think we're in an okay place for this year. And, you hate to hack away and then find out that you panicked, but I guess we'll see. I tend to be a little more optimistic.
So you're a buy.
Well, I'm middle of the road.
Yeah, I know. But
there's a couple different ways it can go,
I think this is a normal year and everything's fine. We're in great shape. I'm like super psyched.
But if it was a normal year, we wouldn't be in this place.
So we all know there's tough sledding ahead. We just don't know what it is, and
that's right. And how long it'll be sustained for.
We got a health crisis and a financial crisis. So it's.
I assume that in department head meetings and, maybe us as liaisons talking with our departments, just say, look, it looks okay for this year. We think, we hope, but, start thinking already about how you would work it next year with a reduction, because.
Dollar reduction. Just flat out say dollar reduction. It's not just services reduction.
Right. Just you may not have the same dollars in 22 that you've got in 21. So start thinking now about how you would do that. So it's not a panicked rush next spring.
Yeah, I think that's accurate.
Yeah, at some point, I think we're FinCom. I think at some point these are, I don't mean to dish it to you guys, but I think it's a selectman thing at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, FinCom's not about making 5-year projections because there's just too much uncertainty out there in normal times, and this is worse.
Sure.
Karen Duvall, any other comments?
No, I think, I'm in agreement with you all that, other than Mike, I think it's, I'm fine with us moving forward with where we are. I was just looking for clarification as what it is that target is.
That's where I was going to go next. So what target do we want to go with now that it's as low as 135 and as high as probably 165, right? And is there anything else that we missed? We have so many moving parts that we're trying to just get back to an even fact pattern, right? So we're getting close. I think next week we'll have updated sheets, updated numbers, and we'll have updated positions, and we'll try to get that to everybody as quickly as possible by the end of the week. But I think I'm thinking probably more like we tell them 160, 165.
Yeah.
I think that makes me more comfortable that we're being as strong as we can relative to our conservatism on that space and not leaving that other 35, 40 on the table to be arguing about next week.
I intend to talk to Kevin tomorrow morning to see if the Board of Selectmen can give you any more help in terms of trying to resolve this issue.
Fine, 100,000 in a week. Okay.
Well, I think it gives them the opportunity to find it or not, right? And then we know where we stand. I'd rather not have them find 130 and then us come back and go, well, these other 35 we're not going to cover. We're not going to recommend covering. I'd rather see them make the choices. To John's point, it's not our position to make the choice; it's our position to.
And that's how we've done it. I think I'm proud that I think we've done a great job of being open and transparent and treating every group the same. And in good times, we try to do that. And in bad times, we try to do that. And that's what we're trying to do. And love people to understand the picture of what we're looking at and trying to get them to make their call of how they adjust their organization accordingly. And then we have to sit there and say, is that pain being shared evenly? And that's what we're trying to figure out. And then there's going to be our job is going to be the cleanup of, Karen Duvall. Sometimes it's been midnight, sometimes it's been later, and you're sitting there with sometimes 4 and sometimes 25 items on this list. It's all this. It's all interesting stuff that in theory you'd want to vote yes on, but it's, based on that needle you're trying to thread. And it's not until that night of that you have the absolute clearest picture as to what that is. And then you have all the input needed for us to do our job of how do you balance it. So it's a kind of painful process, but thank you, everybody.
You guys have done a great job. Thank you very much.
Good job.
Tough times.
Yeah, I know. And everybody's going there. I'm sure everybody's got personal stories and friends and all sorts of stuff that's happening. It's crazy. And nobody's been able to see each other, and everybody who we've got our kids who've got like a lot of three-ring circus entertainment, but then other people are just alone and get to only see people through windows and driving down the street. So it's starting the psychology. So I saw an article yesterday that there's 3 crises. The third one's a psychological crisis, which is now just starting to rear its head. You have
it will, no doubt.
Crisis, and now
you'll see it. And when people reacclimate, you'll see that too. Because
and then there's going to be what's the new world. So
that's right. Yep.
So I know it's getting later. Anybody want to make any motions on any articles to vote on or other topics to discuss?
I was going to make the motion to adjourn.
That's not your job.
I've been waiting for 20 minutes.
Hearing no motions, I'm looking for Karen Dow's motion.
I will make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Seconded by Eric, and it's always unanimous. Jen and Catherine, we'll go work on that cheat sheet just to make it even clearer for everybody. Anybody call me anytime. I'm proud of everybody's come together as a group. I think we've had some painful discussions, but everybody's very, very collaborative. So thank you, everybody.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right.
You gonna take a vote?
Thank you so much.
Oh, it's
A vote?
Oh, yeah.
we have to do a roll
Have to
call.
do a
vote?
roll call to
Okay.
Roll call to adjourn.
All right, Eric,
Aye.
Jay,
All right.
Karen,
which one?
either one.
Aye.
Karen,
Bye.
Mike,
Aye.
Lou,
Aye.
and I'll vote aye as well.
Well,
Thank you for the reminder, Mr. Gant.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night,
Good night,
everyone.
all.
Guys.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.